Welcome to Gevercom, where the wise get wiser. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the 12th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And with that, we're going to look at a couple key words, two of which are body parts that are often used metaphorically and are really important in understanding and interpreting the whole of the Bible, especially the Old Testament. And so, of course, along with that, we're going to read two verses from the book of Proverbs, which will help us to see these words in context, again, to better understand how the Hebrew language is working, to practice reading, and to ultimately learn and understand God's word better. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, well, we are going to get started with our next letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Lamed. But as, of course, we normally do, let's practice our Hebrew alphabet just a little bit before we get into it. So we're going to go through the alphabet a little bit quick here at the front end. So if you're able, follow along or maybe even pause and try doing it yourself first. So let's go through it. We have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin. Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, that's the Hebrew alphabet. Well, let's go ahead and practice it just a little bit slower, again, just to make sure we're getting it right. So, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, He, Tzadeh, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and Tav. All right, good job. Well, that's our Hebrew alphabet. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about this letter Lamed just a bit more. So let's begin by looking at how we write it. This letter is a little bit unique compared to the others because the letter Lamed actually is the only letter that really goes above, especially significantly above, our space. So we've already seen at least one letter, and there are others that go below our letter space. But Lamed is unique because it goes above, and this is actually how it starts. So as you can see here, you start by doing a little downstroke, vertical stroke, and then you're going to create a horizontal stroke. Okay? So imagine doing this with your pen, pull out a piece of paper and try it. And then it does kind of a little bit of a sort of a squiggly here. So it might take a little bit of practice to get this right. But you kind of go down and then over and then down again. Again, filling up that space, that normal letter space. So again, you start with this vertical over and then sort of squiggly down to the bottom. And that's how you write the letter Lamed. So unique in some respect here. All right, well, let's also talk about some of the different types of fonts that we might encounter with the letter Lamed. Again, this is just to help us be aware and be familiar in case we do see some different fonts so we won't get tripped up. All right, well, you can see here that in this font, it's very much kind of like how we just wrote it. It's a little bit square, right? So nice and square, and then has a little bit of squiggly there, okay? Others, though, as you can see here, are much more rounded, right? So you come down, you go over, and then it's a nice kind of rounded edge here instead of more of a squiggly. This one is kind of a funny looking font. It's a little angular. as you see here, and kind of skinny. But all that to say, you can kind of see and perhaps get the idea of what's important and what's key to this letter. For instance, like I said, whether this little vertical part at the very beginning, the top, is long or short, it is present in all the different forms. And again, whether or not this is a nice kind of square or a little bit more rounded, it always has this horizontal piece and then some form of either squiggly or rounded piece that goes down to the bottom, okay? So those are really the key aspects of this letter, Lamed. All right, well, let's look at it from a historical perspective, just a little bit. And this one's a little bit tricky because there are some different forms that have appeared over time. But representative here, we have the Proto-Sinaitic, so one of the earliest forms. And so we have this sort of rounded piece that comes down. And honestly, if you look at it, it kind of looks like the Lamed, just sort of turned sideways. So it's sort of like they took this same letter, but just sort of made it more vertical instead of horizontal. All right, kind of similar here with the Paleo-Hebrew form, except it's sort of flipped upside down. So for whatever reason, you can see that this kind of gets flipped over. And then for whatever reason, in the more later Aramaic form of the Hebrew letters that we typically use nowadays, it flips upside down. So we also see that in ancient Greek, the letter lambda, which is of course the equivalent letter, which is where we get our L from in English, was sort of like a V, if you will. So perhaps a little bit representative of all those different forms that we've seen here. All right, well, what to know about the letter Lamed? Well, very nicely, it's the sound L, very similar to what we have in English. So not too much different, and usually this is pretty easy for people to get familiar with, and especially because of this top piece here. Typically, it's not confused with other letters, but there is at least one letter that sometimes people struggle with just a little bit, and that's the letter Dalet, the D letter, as we see here. So the D or Dalet is very similar, at least in some fonts, except for that top piece. And so this is one of those times where you really do have to pay attention to unique aspects of the letter to help you know which one it is. And it's not superfluous. It's not just extra fancy business going on. This is a necessary part of our letter Lamed. So again, hopefully this will help you distinguish those two letters, especially as you encounter and work through the different passages of the Bible. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with a few of our key words. And so we can see here two very common words that mean basically the same thing. We have here the word low, 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 and the word all, low, and all. And as I said, both mean no. Now, for this first one, low, I like to say low means no. Low means no. So hopefully that'll help you remember it when you come across it. Low means no. And of course, all is related. It means basically the same thing. All right, so low. All right, and then our next word here, and this is one of those body parts that's very important and comes up throughout the Bible, and it can have a literal sense of heart, but typically the word lev or levav in the Old Testament Hebrew doesn't mean just simply the heart. It really means kind of like the mind almost, like we would think perhaps, and perhaps better in the sense of like your will, your motivation, passion, right? And so in the modern, especially English-speaking world, we've associated the heart with love, Valentine's Day or something. But in the ancient world, it was really more in the sense of mind and will. So again, when it says in Deuteronomy to love the Lord with all of your heart, it doesn't just mean to love in the sense of, like Valentine's Day love, with your heart, but it means like with all of your will, with all of your mind, with the very core of your motivations in life. And so, as you can imagine, this idea of with your whole heart becomes a very common theme and repeating phrase, especially as it pertains to devotion to the Lord and following in His ways. And so we see this come up quite often, especially in this metaphorical way. Okay, well, how about a couple more interesting words with the letter Lamed? We have first here the word lechem, lechem, and lechem is the word for bread, just as we hear in the name Bethlehem, Bet Lechem, right? Lechem means bread. All right, well, a kind of a similar but slightly different meaning word is the word lacham, lacham. And so lacham is actually a verb meaning he fought, he fought. So they're similar in that they have the same three core root letters, lamed chet mem, lamed chet mem. They sound a little different, lechem and lacham, but one is a noun meaning bread and one means he fought. Now, I wonder if perhaps the word for bread is related to lacham because they got in a fight over the bread. Maybe because it was really good bread, or maybe it was the last piece of bread. I'm not sure. But maybe that's why they're fighting. Maybe it was over the bread. But in either case, these are two very common and important words that we find throughout the Bible. All right, well, here's another word that is a body part, and that is the word lashon. 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 And again, this is an important one, kind of like heart, though slightly different, because tongue is often used in the sense of like speech or sometimes language, meaning like the language of a people group, but often in the sense of speech, like your words, right? And so much like we're supposed to love, the Lord with all of our heart, we're also supposed to watch our tongue in a sense, right? And as we're going to see here in our verses from Proverbs, it's often used in this metaphorical sense rather than merely the literal sense of a tongue. All right, well, one last word here, and this is, I'm bringing this up just because it is a very common word with the letter lamed, and that's the word lachach. Lachach. That's a bit weird to say for us in English, but it's sort of this la-kach, la-kach. And this means primarily to take. He took. But interestingly, it can also mean to marry. So in the sense of he took a wife, right? And so it can literally mean to take, but maybe more metaphorically at times to marry. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into our Bible verse here and see some of our words in action. So let's begin with Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16. So go ahead and read this with me if you can. So we have here, Shesh, Hena, Saneh, Adonai. Shesh, Hena, Saneh, Adonai. Shesh, Hena, Saneh, Adonai. Sorry about that. So this is the word shesh is the word for six. Six. And then hena is the word for like things or those, we might say. So those six things, we might say. Or maybe we simplified in English to say these six things. Sound a little bit better. So six things. And then saneh, which is the word for hate. It's a verb. So to hate, saneh. And then, of course, the Lord's name, Adonai or Yahweh. So 6 things the Lord hates. What does the Lord hate? Well, another little part of this poem, if you will, we have Veshava to'avot, nafsho, Veshava to'avot, nafsho. All right, well, what do we have here? Well, as we've often seen, this and at the beginning, ve. So and, shava, 7. This is the number 7. So just as we saw shesh, 6, now we have shava. So 6 things the Lord hates, and shava, 7, to'avot, nafsho. To'avot is like an abomination. It's like abhorrent or, disgusting, if you will. And then the word nafsho. Now, O is something we've often seen attached, and that's that word he or him or it, right? And in this case, his. And that word nefesh is the word oftentimes translated soul, but earlier in Hebrew, in the Bible, sometimes it's just in the sense of life, like the sort of lifeness of the thing. But here, probably more in the sense of soul. So in other words, 6 things the Lord hates, and 7 are an abomination of his soul. In other words, 7 things are totally in opposition to who he is and his character and his ways. And interestingly, as we find in the Torah, to'avot, the abominations, are things that actually create relational disunity or distinction. So we actually see it first really used in distinction from the Egyptians and the Hebrews. That they were not to fellowship, they were not to have meals together or have things in common. So there was kind of this division, if you will. And then we also see the to'avot abominations with regards to some of the evil practices and the response for Israel and even the Lord because of that disobedience and the impurities that they had incurred. And so it kind of has this sort of relational disfellowship sense to the word abomination. All right, so 6 things the Lord hates, and 7 are abominations of his soul. Again, this kind of play on the numbers 6 and 7. And some have wondered, is this like meant to be literal, or is it confused? Well, it's poetic, and as we'll see here, it partly, but there's more to this section. There are sort of 7 things that are mentioned, but really 6 that are kind of unique or distinct. 2 of them are overlapping, and they have to do with actually words or the speech of a person. So then we see here in verse 17, Ennaim, Ramot, Leshon, Shaker. Ennaim, Ramot, Leshon, Shaker. So what do we have here? Well, we have this word for eyes, Ennaim. This just means literally eyes, or 2 eyes, more literally. So 2 eyes, and then Ramot. And Ramot, it comes from the root word meaning to like be high or exalted. So Ramot would mean something like exalted eyes. And of course, this is kind of a metaphor poetically to indicate somebody who holds their head up high, right? Who's arrogant, who is haughty. And then we have Leshon. Leshon, of course, that's one of our keywords, tongue. So Leshon Shaker. And Shaker is the word for lying or deceit. So Leshon Shaker. So the Lord hates, or it's an abomination, haughty eyes and a lying tongue. So interesting that God is using these body parts as metaphors for something more internal, something abstract, right? And in many ways, that's kind of true, right? Our outside, our actions, our deeds, in many ways, are a representation of what's really going on in our heart. And so haughty eyes means a proud heart, right? A lying tongue, again, is a deceitful heart and is an abomination to the Lord. All right. And we see a few more here. We see ve yadaim, shofchot, dam naki. Ve yadaim, shofchot, dam naki. All right, so what do we have here? Well, again, we have that word and, ve. So and we've learned this word, but it looks a little different because we have this plural ending. But it's the word yad, which means hand. So in this case, it actually means two hands, right? So and hands or two hands. And then shofachot, and that's from this root word shafak, meaning to spill or to pour out. So in this case, hands that pour out or spill, dam, which is that word for blood, or the blood of naki, and that's that word innocent, or used oftentimes in this sense of those who are being killed unjustly or harmed unjustly. And so whether it's literally pouring out their blood or in a more kind of metaphorical sense of treating unjustly and abusing and taking advantage of, which was against the law, the Torah, in the earlier part of the Hebrew Bible. And so this is something that the Lord absolutely hates. All right, well, now let's take a look at another interesting verse from Proverbs in chapter 4. So let's read this one together. So we see here, mi, kol, mishmar, or mishmor. So mi, kol, mishmor, netzor, li veka. So mi, kol, mishmar, netzor, libaka. All right, so what do we have here? Well, we can see here that we have again that very common word that's attached, the preposition mi, meaning from. So from, and then kol, which is a word we've learned recently, all. As you can see here, is attached to our next word, so that's why it's in this form, kol. So from, or perhaps in this case, more than, all mishmor, from the root word shamar, meaning to guard. So more than all, every guarded thing, or more than all the things you might guard. Netzor, guard or protect. Leveka. And liveka is from lev, meaning heart. And of course, that pronoun attached to the end, which we've seen quite often, right? Ka, meaning your heart. So in other words, it says more than anything that you might protect or guard, protect your heart. All right. And why? Well, it says ki mi menu. Ki mi menu. To tzeot chaim. Ki mi menu. To tzeot chaim. All right, well, what's going on here? Well, again, we encounter this word ki, very common. Hopefully you did write it down. So ki means for, because, sometimes that. But here it's giving the explanation as to what or why. For, mi menu, from it, to tzeot. And this is a word meaning like to flow or to, kind of in the sense of to bubble or something. And then chaim, meaning life. That very important and key word, chaim, sometimes using the phrase in modern days, l'chaim, meaning to life or for life, but here just chaim, life. So from it flows life, or life flows. And so, interestingly, in this, teaching from Proverbs, the Father or the Lord is teaching the Son to be careful about what goes into your heart, what you let in. Guard it above all the treasures that you might normally guard. It's typical for people to, take all of their money and lock it away in a bank and protect it with guards and, build a castle around it and take all these measures to guard their money. And yet they're so flippant and just disregard protecting their own heart, and they just let anything in. And that is really a foolish way of seeing your own heart and your money, because money is gonna end. It's not forever. It's temporary. But as it says here, our life does depend on the purity and where our heart lies, right? As Jesus later says, wherever your heart is, or wherever your treasure is, there will your heart be as well. And so I think he's kind of building off of this sense from Proverbs, right? Guard your heart above all other treasures, because that is really where our life will be found. Whether we love the Lord with all of our heart, or whether we love our treasure and the things in this life with all of our heart. And that really will be determine whether or not we have the life that comes from God or not. So again, I hope that's something that we can take away from our reading here, but also just in life. So we follow the wisdom of Proverbs. Guard our hearts. All right, well, let's go ahead and finish up with our Hebrew alphabet one last time here. So let's do it together. We have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, well, that's the Hebrew alphabet and our letter Lamed. And I hope you learned something, and I do honestly hope you'll share something with somebody else. Perhaps what is most important in life to you. Hopefully it's the Lord and trusting in Him with all of your heart. I look forward to seeing you next time when we look at our next letter, the letter Mem.